Final Fantasy X is, for many people, including myself, their favorite thing Square Enix has ever made. Like many of their RPGs, FF10 explores deep social themes, such as xenophobic bigotry between Yevon and the Al Bhed, the technophobic ludism of Yevon's teachings, and the problems of giving absolute faith to empowered organizations or abstract concepts. These themes, and how they impacted the lives and relationships between the casts of characters, have been analyzed and reviewed ad infinitum on the internet, but there is something that no one else has noticed or discussed about this game that I want to highlight: the influence of Hindu and Buddhist ontology, specifically surrounding the main character, Tidus, and by extension you, the player. Ontology is the word we philosophy types use to categorize ideas about being and the nature of existence itself. It is the philosophy of reality, and one of the oldest ideas we have is that the world we experience is not as real as it could be. Starting with the Rig Veda, a text that posed many conflicting questions and answers about the nature of the cosmos, starred a cast that often wondered about things like how many times the sun, moon, and stars have vanished and reappeared. Hinduism would, through these questions, go on to define time as infinite and cyclical, and then go on to see the current cycle to be an imperfect reality formed from the dream of the god Vishnu, who represents and will, with each breath, wake up to the true self, the unchanging reality called Atman. Buddhism, as a skeptical response to Hinduism, created the idea of anatman, or no self, asserting that since all levels of reality are cyclical and impermanent, that there is no true reality, and any perception of such is illusory, not real. As Buddhism came to Japan, many new artistic depictions of the idea of anatman took shape, one of the most prominent of which was the image of the moon being reflected off the surface of the water. For example, the Zen artist Hakuin's depiction of a monkey reaching for the reflection of the moon in a pond while dangling from a tree, or the poet Kino Tsurayuki's poem A Singular Thing, which reads, "A singular thing, it was, I thought, yet from the water's depths, not from the mountain's peak, comes moonlight." Now you may be wondering why we have spent time in this video for a short art history lesson, mainly because Final Fantasy X both expresses and responds to Hindu and Buddhist thought while empowering the player to subtly interact with these ideas through one of the JRPG's oldest systems, naming your character. Final Fantasy X was the first Final Fantasy game to have voice acting, and with it came characters that not only have canonical names, but speak those names and converse with and about one another. In previous Final Fantasy games, while characters had canon names of their own, players were always given the option to rename those characters to something more personal. In Final Fantasy X, the only characters you can rename are the Aeons, this game's version of the powerful attacks called summons, and also Tidus. And why is that? Well, it certainly is not to allow the player to have a self-insert, because Tidus has a personality all his own that could conflict with the player's sense of pride. Rather, it is because Tidus is an Aeon. Let me explain. An Aeon is made by a religious shrine called a faith, which are people who have entered an eternal sleep in order to make their strongest emotion physically manifest. Just like Vishnu, it is revealed late in the game that Sin, Jekt, and by extension Tidus, all of them are a dream formed by the faith of Zanarkand. To further emphasize Tidus's illusory existence, no character in the game, nor in the sequel 10-2, speaks Tidus's name. The common explanation for this has been that it is because you can rename him that they could not speak the character's name, but it is exactly the opposite. Because they could not speak the character's name, we get to rename him. Tidus being a dream is a narrative element linking the character to the idea of Atman. Tidus's naming system and unspoken name is a ludonarrative element connecting the character to the idea of an Atman by transforming one of the most fundamental and mundane aspects of JRPGs into a narrative element. The name, however, is not the only metaphorical connection used for Tidus's character. Like Hakuin's painting and Kino Tsurayuki's poem, Tidus is constantly depicted as a shimmering reflection atop a pool of water himself. During the Zanarkand Abe's blitzball scene, Tidus sits soaked on the edge of the arena just before a massive flash of light. During some scenes of Tidus talking to himself, a wave-like, screen-distorting filter is placed over the game. Most importantly, during the famous underwater date scene, Tidus and Yuna are a glowing point in a dark pond representing the moon.
And like literally the moon is being reflected on the surface of the water. It's literally on purpose. It's like an artistic homage or something.
But what is more important than Tidus representing these ideas is the argument that the game's story forms by presenting them both in a single main character. Much like how contrasting ideas are proposed and questioned non-dogmatically in the Rig Veda for their reader to answer. Tidus's monologues are question-oriented and actively admit his lack of understanding about the world. As the dream of Zanarkand, he represents Atman, the true self and unchanging reality, but by lacking a name and merely being a reflection of the Zanarkand that once was, he represents an Atman, no self, and the ever-changing reality. How can both Atman and an Atman, persistence and transience, coexist as true ontological views of the world? For that, we turn both to the final cutscene of Final Fantasy X and the endings of Final Fantasy X-2. In the last cutscene of 10, Yuna tells us to never forget the dreams that were lost, then shows us the same scene from the underwater date, only instead looking at the sky and the actual moon, which in Buddhist art represents the Buddha and being free from delusion. In 10-2's sad ending, Yuna reflects on how despite being a dream, he was still connected to Yuna. And in 10-2's perfect ending, as Tidus wonders about still being a dream, Yuna jokes back about him not disappearing after being pushed into the water. Final Fantasy X, through the relationship between Yuta and Tidus, argues that our desires, our dreams, and our misperceptions, even if they are transient, persist as long as we persist. Neither so permanent as Atman, nor so transient as an Atman. Even if we are mistaken about the world or the nature of reality, our experience of the world was still real for a time, and that alone is reason enough to cherish it. Thank you for watching, my friends. If you enjoyed this video, you should also enjoy our much older video on the religious philosophy of the Cappadocians presented in the game Atelier Sophie. And look forward to our upcoming video on the philosophy of Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice. If you found value in this video, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons below, and to talk with other people in the community, you can join the SocraTetris Symposium Discord server through the link in the description. Thank you again, see you at the next video, and remember, stay true.